what separates a good creek from a not so good creek for smallmouth?
Areas with deep water, moving water, and it needs to stay within a certain temperature range.
What are they focused on?
From what I've seen, it's crayfish and minnows.
And is that like a 50-50 crayfish minnow type thing, or does it skew one way or the other?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Top 3 flies and then top 3 traditional tackle.
Top 3 flies. That's pretty easy.
In the Ozarks, people have always lived in rhythm with the natural world. Hunting, fishing, living off the land aren't just things we like to do, it's who we are. And though our lives are inextricably linked to the land we live on, today we've never been more disconnected from it. So join us as we travel across the region, bringing you the voices of the Ozarks, deepen our connection to the land, sharpen our skills in the outdoors, and learn what it means to be an Ozarker. Welcome back to the Ozark podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Veet, joined as always by co-host of the show and my good buddy, Mr. Kyle Plunkett.
Yes, sir.
How's it going?
Going good. We're back at Diamond State Fly Co.
That's right. 1 week later.
Actually, we're recording on the same day, but we're back.
Yeah.
We are back.
Because now you're listening a week later, so we're back.
That's right. We're back, and we're joined again by Ben Levin. And this time, last week we talked caddis, and we dove kind of deep into caddis, as deep as we could in the time that we had allotted. There's so much more that we were just talking about that we could have spent another hour on at least. But this week, we are going a little bit closer to home for us as far as native fish, your roots, my roots, kind of what we all grew up on these native fish, and that is talking about Ozark, bronzebacks, the smallmouth. And I know you cut your teeth on this, and you spent a ton of time honing your craft and catching smallmouth with your mentors and with your brother and by yourself. So I'll start with this. What about smallmouth fishing is interesting and intriguing to you to where you never get tired of it?
Well, I mean, for me personally, first, it's like whatever species of fish you grow up catching as a kid is always going to have a special place in your heart, and it's going to be something that you will always try to return to, sort of in your mind or when you're out there on the stream. There's a certain mystery to whatever you grew up catching that you will always be intrigued by. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm still drawn to smallmouth. Now, even after many years of fishing to them and guiding for them, I'm still drawn to them because they live in some of the most beautiful, pristine places in the Ozarks, and they're hard to catch. They're never, ever really easy to catch, and it's very hard to catch what I would call a big one here, especially in the Ozarks. Mm-hmm. So that is always sort of a quest and a challenge for any river or creek here to find a really, truly big wild smallmouth here in the Ozarks. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. That keeps me coming back, and trying to figure out different ways to do it. Is there a better way? Of course, that's always going to be happening with fishing of any kind. But for a fish that's pretty wary and pretty hard to catch in the first place, that gives you a pretty long lifetime of trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Talk me through. I'm kind of curious just about your evolution as a smallmouth angler. Do you remember like the first time? You probably would have been way too young to even have a specific memory, but just the early days and kind of how it's morphed for you over time. How have you dialed in your tactics? How have you changed and from what you started as to today that now you feel a lot more confident in going out and catching them?
I have some very vague memories of what I think were the first smallmouth that I ever caught. I certainly have some pretty clear memories of spending many days on the Little Mulberry and the Mulberry and that river system where I grew up. I think what did it for me when I was a really little kid was like just the idea that there's this almost trout-shaped bass that lives somewhere in that water. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know how to catch it, I know it's there. I've heard it's there, And so you start, fooling around and talking to people who've done it. And somehow I managed to catch one of these things when I was probably 5 years old. And I have some very vague memories of just being in shock and awe that, like, this really cool looking fish came out of that water that's like right behind my house. Like, I didn't even think that was even remotely possible. So fast forward many years to now, and you learn along the way what they eat, all the different patterns and the techniques, all the different rivers they live in, what habitat you're looking for. All that is still super fun and interesting, but it all goes back to, I think for me, finding something that's just sort of out of this world and different to you in your mind, that you're pulling out of a piece of water somewhere. And because these fish are hard to catch, and catching a big one is so hard, it just seems that checks that box. It's a special fish. They're not everywhere,
Right.
They don't fall out of the sky. You can't just walk down to any Ozark Creek and catch them, or catch a bunch of them, or certainly catch a big one. So whatever it takes to sort of have that novel experience again of like, oh my God, I've sort of figured something out, discovered something. That's what all of this really is about.
Yeah. Did you grow up fly fishing for them, or did you grow up kind of wet wading in the creek with your ultralight rod out there catching them off of little worms and PB&J stuff?
Right. All my earliest fishing experiences were with conventional tackle, wet wade in the creeks. I got a fly rod when I was about 10 years old, and that's when obviously sort of things took a different turn, and I did start catching some smallmouths around that age, but it was conventional tackle to begin with, and with whatever whether that was an artificial lure or worms or grasshoppers, whatever, it didn't matter,
That seems to be the most accessible way to get into it, and at least like that's how I started, and I'm sure that's how you started.
Totally.
It's so accessible. It's so easy to go out there, and you've got a little pack with a few things that you can tie on. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Do you still, or are you exclusive to fly fishing now
No,
for smallmouth? Or do you go back and forth?
Most people think I am, but I'm not.
Okay.
Now for trout, I fly fish exclusively, and that's nothing against spin fishing for trout. That's just the preferred method that I like to use. For smallmouth, I prefer to fly fish, but there are many times where, whether it's flows or conditions or whatever, fishing like ultralight spin gear or conventional tackle is definitely the smarter play to do. And I like doing it. I think there's a lot of finesse involved, and it's very effective. And it's very catch and release oriented, fine for the fish.
Yeah.
Kyle and I talk quite a bit on how it's easy to build your identity around some vein in the outdoor world and feel like you have to do that for everything.
Right.
But then you actually miss out on the whole world and all that it's included.
Yeah.
Like the guys who are, I'm traditional bow only. It's like, that's awesome.
Right.
Love that for you. There's also times where a rifle is going to be better.
Right.
And more power to them, actually, if they just are dead set on staying with that. But same in the fishing world. It's I'm a fly fisherman. There's also times where ultralight is going to be better. You're in some tiny little creek tucked up where you can't even back cast without hitting a tree. It's like, change up your stuff and go do it.
Light spin tackle is a blast.
Oh, it's so fun.
It's super fun.
Yeah.
Well, and they fight like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, of course, it's fun.
Yeah, I love
But that's
doing
good to
it.
hear.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that the guy who's known for fly fishing
Right.
isn't afraid to say, you know what, I'll pick that up. I'll go
Right.
do
Goes
that.
out there with it.
Well, and as I get older too, like sometimes I like to work a little less,
Yeah.
And like I'm not saying that it's super easy, but even with my guide trips too, there's a lot of times when I know it's going to be really hard to catch a smallmouth on a fly, and there's going to be some light spin rods as backup in the boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this then. What are those days? When are you going to opt for one versus the other?
It kind of depends on what the attitude of the fish is. Most of the time I'll try fly fishing first, and most of the time I'm pretty successful at it. But if the fish are sluggish, usually with water's pretty high, or if we've had a cold front come through, that's probably the number one, when bass are just like glued to the bottom, temperatures down, they're just not very aggressive, and you just got to go down to them.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a fly down in deep water. If we just had a rain event with some high water, anything that involves high water, cold front, bright overhead sun, says you need to go down to those fish. They're not gonna come to you. So those are good times to use spin tackle.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So talk me through. We're sitting here. We're recording this in March. This will probably come out in April sometime. For people around here in the Ozarks who are wanting to go out and get on some smallmouth, what would be some of the things you look for? Like you said, they're not in every creek, and especially not big ones. You're not going to go out and catch a trophy fish in a tiny little nothing creek. You can sometimes, and I have seen places where in creeks where I fish where it doesn't look like much of a creek, but there are some really good fish holed up in there. What separates a good creek from a not so good creek for smallmouth?
I'll start by talking about what I know here in Arkansas, and like my three favorite rivers to catch smallmouth are Buffalo River, Kings River, and Crooked Creek. And I'll always be a little more partial to Crooked Creek because I've spent a lot of time on it. But all three of those rivers are probably what I would consider our best smallmouth rivers within the northern Ozarks region of Arkansas. There's some other streams getting closer to Oklahoma that are really good, but within a reasonable distance of the area that I call home right now, those are sort of the big three.
What about Missouri, if you don't mind asking?
Missouri has some incredible smallmouth fishing.
Okay.
The 11 Point has got some great smallmouth in it towards the bottom end of it where it comes into Arkansas. The Current River, up and down many miles of the Current, is very good. The Elk River in southwest Missouri has got some really nice fish in it. Parts of the North Fork of the White have smallmouth in it. The James River is a pretty good river in certain stretches. And I know there's a bunch more that I'm not even listing that I don't come to mind just yet.
Yeah.
But the Kings, Buffalo, and Crooked Creek in Arkansas, and those three carry a pretty good amount of water throughout the year, anywhere from like 100 to 200 CFS, sometimes less when we're in the middle of summer or fall, all the way up to several thousand CFS, and of course way more during flood stage. So they've got a good volume of water. They're pretty long rivers. They've all got 80 plus miles of fishable water, and they've all got the big cross section of habitat that you need for pretty good smallmouth fishing. You need plenty of areas with deep water, and you need plenty of areas with moving water, and it needs to stay within a certain temperature range. Without going into all the technicalities of that, just a good variety of habitat. When you get to any one of those three rivers, if you pull up to a good hole, you're like, man, that looks good. That looks real good. There's a weed bed over here. There's a deep bank with boulders and logs and some shade, and then there's a gravel bar over here, and then that drops down into a riffle or a shoal, and then the whole pattern sort of repeats itself. That's kind of the formula, is that riffle run deep pool for miles and miles and miles, and we've all been there. It's like when you see fishy water, you know it.
Yeah.
It's just got
you can't always put a finger on it.
No, but it's
you
like
just know something's
yeah,
up.
yeah.
That makes sense.
When you branch off of those rivers, you got their tributaries.
Okay.
And some of those tributaries are sort of like miniature versions of those rivers, like the Little Buffalo, or maybe Clear Creek, or the Osage, Richland Creek, and then off of those you start getting into your much smaller creeks, and that's where it really gets hard to find a much bigger fish.
Right.
But you most of these streams have smallmouth in them of some kind. You stop seeing smallmouth where you get into the seasonal streams that go dry for a very long time.
Right.
And those are usually pretty small little creeks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
They need that year-round habitat.
Right. They need that year-round flow. Yeah.
And they're pretty picky about the type of water that they're going to sit and reside in, especially as you get later into the summer, right?
Yeah.
They're looking for high oxygenated water. They're looking for some type of movement. These are not the fish they're going to sit in a pond.
They don't like pond type water in the sense that, of course, the temperature, but the oxygen level and the turbidity of the water, the other two factors. They do need more oxygen than, say, a largemouth. They don't like a lot of like suspended debris in the water. The water's got to be fairly clean and clear. and even in the summertime, even in the dog days of summer, they need some kind of current, some kind of movement, and something to keep that water from getting too hot, whether that's shade or a little bit of riffle movement, something stirring up the oxygen, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So this time of year, spring going into, or basically coming into spring, but then spring going into summer, what would you say is kind of the best?
What you're kind of looking for to catch them right now?
Yeah, I'm thinking just, we're coming into spring and people are getting excited. It's warm.
Right.
People want to get out and they want to go try to find some smallmouth.
Yeah.
If they find a creek that is good and has some smallmouth in it, what would be the best plan of attack? Is getting in the water and attacking a smallmouth?
Try and pick the days that are warmer for first of all. This time of year, some sunlight on the water is not necessarily a bad thing. Fishing the sunnier side of a river is kind of like, it sounds like sacrilege to smallmouth anglers, but this time of year it can actually help you quite a bit. Something where the sunshine will warm up the riverbed, it'll warm up the water column a little bit, and deep water is usually the way to go this time of year, but not always. Surprisingly, shallow water heats up faster than deep water. Where sun is beaming down on like a gravel bar or a sandy flat, that's going to heat up quicker than a 10-foot hole where less light reaches the bottom. The deep hole is sort of your fallback to if you can't catch them in shallower moving water, which you can't always this time of year, but you'd be surprised sometimes. I've caught them in some surprising places in March and early April if we've had warm enough weather. In general, though, the fallback strategy is to fish deep and heavy and dredge through what we call their wintering holes, where they go to when the weather's the coldest. And that's just deeper water where they can sort of just hunker down and their metabolism slows down, and it's their wintering hole.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you're out there and you've kind of found some of these spots you're fishing, how are you? There's so many variabilities, variations of, you've got shallow water, you've got deep water, you've got in the sun, you've got different structure going on. And if you're moving up and down a creek, say you're wet wading, you're going to be thrown a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah.
How do you put together a strategy to kind of do that? Because at the end of the day, you're sitting there, and if you're fly fishing, you've got a fly on the end of your rod, and you're trying to do a lot of different things with it in different scenarios. How do you break it down for somebody?
One real simple way to do it is just fish it all.
Do it all.
Just do it all.
Don't quit until you've covered it all.
That's right. Yeah, cover every bit of that water. Look, with smallmouth in the Ozarks, I don't do a whole lot of fly pattern changing. I basically am fishing the water column in some way, and I'm either fishing an imitation of a crawfish, an imitation of a minnow, or an imitation of like some sort of terrestrial bug or a surface minnow, and a popper does that really well. But crayfish and minnows are basically what these fish eat, okay? And so the minnows are a little bit more active this time of year than the crayfish, so I'll probably tie on something like a clouser minnow with heavy lead eyes. And whether I start in a riffle or a pool will kind of depend on the stream I'm at, and also just my previous experience with this area. And I realize not everybody has the time to learn every inch of the river. That's why I say literally sometimes fish it all. Start off just for fun. Start off in your moving water, see if they're in there, see if the sunlight's warmed that up enough for those fish to get active on like a clouser minnow or something. And if not, which probably it's a little too early for that and a little cold, just move to the deeper water and just fish slower and deeper, and then slower still and heavier still, and until you may just need to keep that fly just crawling over the bottom through some of these deeper runs where there's still a little bit of current, but there's structure down there, and the fish are just still kind of in their wintertime mode down there.
Yeah, it's a type of fishing that most anglers hate to do.
Yeah, it's my buddy's
real, slow and slower still.
Right, exactly.
But it can really catch some fish.
You guys have talked with Tad 4. Tad 4 calls it dredge season, and he's right. I mean, this is dredge
season.
This is dredge season right now.
Yeah.
March and early April. If you're lucky, and we've had some warm weather and you're in a spot where the sun has warmed up a riffle or some shallows, you might have some action there. That's why I said try that first because it's fun, you know, because you might be missing something. But after that, if that's no good, go to dredging, man. And that's probably what it's going to end up being. And then as the water temp comes up later in the year, you can fish that fly faster. You can start fishing some streamers, fish more the middle of the water column. And then, of course, in the dog days of summer, fish popping bugs if you want, surface of the water column, that kind of thing.
Right. What would you say the primary food source is for a smallmouth? I think this is going to be a kind of thing where you say it depends on the river and the stream and things like that. But you've spent a ton of time on the water, and you've caught a lot of fish, a lot of smallmouth. I don't know how much background or research you've done on actual food sources, but based on what you've seen, what are they focused on most of the year?
From what I've seen, it's crayfish and minnows.
Okay.
In the Ozarks. And that to me.
Is that like a 50-50 crayfish minnow type thing, or does it skew one way or the other?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All of the above.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on the stream. To answer that question, some streams have more minnows than crayfish. Some streams have more crayfish than minnows. Like the rivers that I grew up on, the Mulberry and the Little Mulberry, have a lot of crayfish. They actually don't have a lot of minnows. And so something that is crayfish or crayfish-like will always work really darn well.
That's wild to me that you can go like stream to stream and have a completely different, I guess, buffet of options for fish where you're like, oh, this is a heavy crawfish.
Mm-hmm.
I call them crawdad like creek.
Right.
This is a heavy minnow creek.
Right. In some cases there is a rhyme and reason to that. When you're in the Ozarks and you get those streams that are more or less drained south into the Arkansas River Valley, streams like the Mulberry and Illinois Bayou, Piney, Lee's Creek, that kind of stuff. Those streams have more of a sandstone base to them, and so the way that a lot of that sandstone fractures up and erodes is very slab-like. If you waded those rivers, like it is hell on your to wade. Like you will break a shin if you're not careful. Huge big boulders and slabs and stuff, which are perfect crayfish type spots. But minnows prefer more like weedy and sort of a gravel bottom because that's more suited to them and how they feed and the type of nymphs that support them. So in the northern part of the Ozarks, the rivers that drain into the White River watershed are all limestone base, and that limestone breaks up into a smaller substrate, and so you have more gravel type rivers here, and that supports more like nymphs and actually more food in general. These rivers are more fertile than your south draining rivers, and that's why there's a way bigger minnow population in rivers like the Kings or Crooked Creek or the Buffalo than say like the Mulberry.
Gotcha.
And the Illinois. Isn't the Illinois much heavier minnow population?
Yes.
I would say so, yeah.
I think we're remembering the right thing, but when we were covering our Neosho series, we had a conversation with one of the biologists who was talking about one specific part of the Illinois he was sent to find crawdads to study way back when.
Right.
He pretty much went back to his department and was like, "You're kidding, right?"
Yeah. They don't
like, no, it's that's what you're there for. He's like, "There's none here."
Right.
And it's crazy that just a couple of miles west, you're going to have a big deal, smally stream,
right,
that is primarily minnow.
Yeah,
it's like crawdads are not the primary source.
That is crazy. You just assume crawdads are everywhere, and they're going to be as thick as they ever were in the river that you grew up in. And maybe would you say that's why I feel like the Mulberry gets a bad rap for not being a great fishery? Do you think that's why?
One of the reasons why is that it doesn't have. Probably the reason why is that it doesn't have a huge food base like some of the other rivers. It's just not as fertile a stream. It's as clean a river as you'll find anywhere.
Right. Yeah, the water's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It flows through wilderness. It's hard. It's not polluted at all, But you also have to have a certain amount of like woody debris and nutrients in the water that'll support like nymphs and your food base from the bottom up, okay? There's some of that there, but it's not like Crooked Creek or the Buffalo or the Illinois or the Kings, that kind of thing. So, that's one reason. It also doesn't carry a whole lot of water in the fall. or even late summer, it gets pretty low.
Yeah.
You know, it can be a good sized river at flood stage, but compared to like, again, the Buffalo, like it doesn't carry that much water. Or the Illinois carries a lot of water year round.
Right.
So it supports a much broader food base, basically. So that helps a lot. You know, going back to the mulberry, rivers like the mulberry, I realize now as I get older, where they lack in maybe fish size and population, they make up for an experience because it's just so dang beautiful there.
It is.
It's stunningly beautiful, and you're still catching a wild native fish. And okay, so a big one there is 14 inches instead of 18 inches. You know, enjoy it. It's always been like that. Hopefully, it'll always be like that. You know, you're not fishing a dammed river. You're not fishing to a stocked fish, and there's hardly any development there. So that, you know, that's one of the trade-offs anyway.
Yeah, they don't live in terrible places.
They don't live in ugly places.
Right.
No.
Yeah,
No.
we've heard that said before. It just seems to be, if you're looking for the experience, you're looking to really tap into an Ozark fish.
Right.
That is from here, born here, raised here, kind of has, you know, we talk about like just the cultural similarities of the people and the fish and the resourcefulness, the tough fighting nature of the fish, just the places where they live. They've carved out a life for themselves in a rugged place. It shares a lot of similarities with the history of people in the Ozarks, and to go to these places and be out there in that environment where maybe it's you and a buddy and you're up on these free flowing streams back in the national forest or coming right out of it, and you just can't pick a better spot.
That's the true Ozarks experience. You know, the White River and our tailwaters and the large trout here get a lot of fame and a lot of glamour, and you know, you'll see them in magazines and that kind of thing. But my brother Gabe said this one time in an interview with Steve Daly. You know, people think, oh, the emblem of fishing in Arkansas is the White River, it's brown trout, and then he said, no, it's not, it's smallmouth. You know, that is the true emblem of fishing, the essence of fishing the Ozarks. That's our Ozark fish right there. You know, trout get all the glory and fame and exposure, but if you want a fish that sort of symbolizes the Ozarks, it's not trout, it's smallmouth.
Right.
You know, trout are not even native to here.
So you can't have your native symbol of the Ozarks be called the German brown trout.
The German, right? Yeah,
come on.
Who's this foreigner guy?
I love a good German brown trout.
Yeah.
But I'm just, that can't be our fish.
No.
It doesn't help that we're also sitting in, what is it, Trout Capital USA?
Right,
like,
here in Cotter. Yeah.
Okay, I've always wondered, and we could pivot for 2 seconds, who gave Cotter that name?
That's a good question.
Is that like Bentonville claiming that it itself is mountain biking capital?
It might
of the
be
world?
Self-given. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not for sure on that.
Like somebody may have bestowed Cotter with Trout Capital of the world.
You need to ask Larry McNair that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does he have the answer? Or
I don't know if he's had
pontificates.
He's from Cotter, and he knows this river better than anybody.
Okay.
He's a true. Not many people are from Cotter. Larry is from Cotter.
Okay.
Larry could give you that answer.
We'll have to ask him.
Good guy too.
People always ask about that when they hear what we do, kind of thing.
Right.
And they're like, what about Trout Capital? Is that real? I don't know.
I don't know. Who knows?
Getting out of Trout Capital and onto
Smallies.
smallmouth streams is that in and of itself is one of the things that keeps me coming back. You know, for smallmouth is that I need a break from tailwaters sometimes. It's getting incredibly crowded. You know, the amount of angling pressure is only going up. There are a lot of people fishing here, you know, and to the point now where certain sections of the White River where you fishing is not even a social experience; it's a crowded experience. You know,
You're playing bumper boats.
Well, playing bumper boats, you know, you hear motors all day, and like you'll go float a section of Crooked Creek, and knock on wood, you know, I hope it never becomes that way. And you know, going down another rabbit hole here, I mean. Some people say, well, why do you even mention it? Well, you do have to mention it somewhat so the health of that river will stay as is if in case, you know, anything happens to the degradation of the water, stuff like that. You know, there is a certain amount of healthy publicity for these streams.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. We talk about that sometimes too, because if a lot of people worry about spot burning and you mentioned the river that I fish all the time, and it's like, well, yes, we did, but it is public water.
Right.
It's not a secret, and also if we mention everywhere, then everything's back to the ground zero. Like everybody knows what the rivers and creeks are, and so that's a thought. But there's the awareness of you can't protect places that people don't know about and people don't care about. And for people to care about something, they have to know about it.
Right.
And that's just
they have to
fundamental.
They have to appreciate it on some sort of other level, than just knowing about it. And look, like these smallmouth streams, they need more protection than anything. And probably the only way to get that is for people to appreciate it. I mean, they need cleaner water. They need protection of the riparian zones. They need long sections of little to no development, which is becoming harder and harder to find. And if people appreciate smallmouth streams for what they are, as a clean, wild source of a fishing experience, then hopefully, when something happens that is detrimental to that, people will get angry and say, no, we don't want this.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're going out of order here a little bit, but I was going to ask you, what are going on with smallmouth right now in terms of, and that's a very vague question, what's going on with the smallmouth? Seasonally, obviously, they're coming through. They have a pre-spawn, a mid-spawn, spawn, and then a post-spawn. And then throughout the year, kind of walk me through the seasonal behaviors and patterns that someone might encounter when they're looking at smallmouth and they're going out, throughout the year.
We're in pre-spawn right now in March, and that can go into early April. Again, it's going to depend on the river, because different rivers heat up at different levels, or at different stages anyway. It takes more time for some rivers to reach a certain temp than others, to get into the low 60s. Don't quote me on that exactly, but that's probably where they like to spawn, is somewhere in that low 60s. And some of that has to do with the amount of volume of water that's in the river. That has a whole effect on it. In general, you can consider February, March, and early April pre-spawn, in my experience, in the rivers that I fish mostly. You start getting into late April and through the first half of May, you're probably going to see some spawning going on somewhere. I've seen it happen as late as June if we've got a cold, wet, late spring. That being said, I've seen spawning happen as early as right now. If we're in a drought type situation, lots of warm, unseasonably warm days and no rainfall, I've seen them spawning in late March on Crooked Creek before. Doesn't always happen that way. Late April through mid-May, maybe even into late May, you'll see some fish spawning somewhere on some of our rivers. And then there's kind of a weird little 2 to 3 week period where right after the spawn, they're just weird. They become hard to catch, and then they really start feeding good again. And the whole, by that time of year, you're usually into at least late May, June. The whole food base is active, water temps up, and then you're into just sort of your regular everyday summer smallmouth fishing cycle, where sort of everything's on the table. You might change tactics throughout the day. And then our lowest water is starting to happen in September, October, November. That can be a really, really tough time of year to fish if we have, that drought type situation, which is very possible. Low, clear water, spooky fish, especially if there's a lot of sun overhead. What can happen, though, is those fish feel the temperature dropping and the days getting shorter. And if you get a little rise in water level somewhere, enough to sort of perk those fish up, they'll go on a little pre-winter bite, a fall feed, if you will. We've heard of that. In my experience on these smaller Ozark streams, the fishing is usually tougher in September and October.
Okay.
You will get those outlier days, though, October, November even, where if you get a bump in water and some warm weather where all of a sudden they're on a feeding frenzy. I wouldn't. That's kind of the exception to the rule.
The anomaly.
I mean, we know how much, you guys know how much low water we see here in the fall. It's usually pretty low.
Yeah.
It's
usually I'm in the deer stand at that point.
Right.
I have moved my interest.
That's a good time of year to fish your bigger rivers, because the ones that carry more water are obviously even harder to fish now and through the spring and early summer. So like lower end of the Buffalo, Illinois, probably the lower end of the Mulberry River, basically the lower end of all of your main rivers. Fall is a little bit better time because those fish are concentrated and condensed, and your flows are more manageable during that time of the year.
As well as significantly less pressure on the river.
Yeah. Way less pressure.
Other people. I mean, you can go out and float a river and not see anyone for the whole day because people are just not thinking float weather or fishing weather.
Right. And people ask about winter too. Like you can catch them in winter. Do you want to? That's up to you. You know, do you want to work? Do you want to work for them? Because you're going to have to work for them. But it is very possible. And sometimes it's possible to catch the biggest fish in a river in the wintertime as their metabolism slows way down. They're retaining all their weight, and then coming back around into that pre-spawn time of year. Their weight's up a little bit. That's where you really can target a trophy. It's not going to be easy, though. You're not going to catch many fish.
No, might catch a couple.
Right, a couple. One, you know.
One. That makes sense.
But it could be a really nice one. And that could be anything from fishing low and slow to maybe fishing streamers on a warm day. You know, you're going to have to work for it and earn it.
Yeah.
But those are for the hardcore small.
Yeah, the guys really want to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So thinking going into the spring, let's wrap this up with top 3 flies and then top 3 traditional tackle lures or patterns. And how you'd fish them.
Top 3 flies. That's pretty easy.
That's good to know. That's normally not the answer.
Right. A Clouser minnow of some kind.
What color?
Tan and white.
Love it.
Tan and white. Or just some kind of natural color scheme. Okay. And Dwayne Haight is the one who sort of taught me all this. In fact, if you could only have one fly for smallmouth, it would be a Clouser minnow. And usually the way we like to time is with craft fur or some kind of material that's got some more movement. You can time with bucktail if you want, but movement is better. Match the color of your minnow to your color of your stream bottom. Most stream bottoms around here are kind of that tannish brown, almost goldeny color.
It's a chert kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another Dwayne Hated tactic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard him say that.
Yeah. I mean, I've learned so much from Dwayne. So the Clouser minnow, and then second pattern will be a crawfish of some kind. While we're talking to Dwayne, his creek crawler. Impossible to beat you
can't beat it.
Such a great fly.
The one that would beat it would be an imitation of his, which was I'm blanking on Keith.
Keith ties a mean one.
Incredible fly. It's almost, I say this every time, it looks like jewelry to me.
It's art. It's art. Yeah. I'm afraid to fish him. I don't want to lose one.
Yeah.
That's a great smallmouth pattern. And then a third one would be a topwater pattern of some kind. I'm going to say a boogle bug, which is a brand of popping bug, probably in either white or some kind of lighter color. That'll fish all sorts of different situations, probably like a size 4, big enough to make some commotion on the water.
And you're fishing that this time of year, or
later
in the summer?
That's later in the summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could in theory get away with it on a warm day. I have caught fish on topwater this time of year.
Okay.
In certain situations, but no, that's more
mostly the late.
Yeah. Late May it starts fishing, and then June, July, and August are great topwater months.
Yeah.
Spin tackle. I'm just going to simplify it and just say one, like some kind of soft plastic that gets down on the bottom. There's a million of them out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the Gets It soft plastics. There's a Ned rig. There's lizards. There's whatever. Pick your poison.
Go as crazy as a lizard and as simple as like, it's a tube.
Right. It's a tube jig.
That's a rubber tube. Got it.
Right. If you really force my hand and held me down, a tube jig. On an 1/8 ounce jig head.
Yep.
And some sort of natural.
It's hard to beat.
Olivey.
It's hard to beat.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
It's
so great.
It's the same kind of fun that you have of going to a Razorback game, or for our Mizzou people up there, a Tigers game, and you're just like enjoying life. You're having a beer. You're talking football.
It's
telling
straightforward.
stories.
Life is simple.
Life is simple.
Yes. You don't have to make decisions.
Yes. It's just life is good.
Just cast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
That is good.
Ben, we can't thank you enough, man, for now 2 weeks worth of episodes out of one evening.
That's right.
Appreciate you guys, man.
Thanks for being willing to.
Would love to do it more. We can do more.
We should later. I think later this spring, summer, we should try to do some filming. Of some stuff.
Yeah, I would
And
love
do some
I would love
stuff.
to. Smalley stuff, whether it's Smalley stuff or one evening out here on the White River or something.
Yeah.
Just
I think it's
something, anything.
It's always good to pair the audio with the, and obviously we have video too for anyone just listening. You can watch it on YouTube, but to pair the tactics and the flies with the actual visual presentation of doing it and seeing what that really looks like on the water.
For sure.
So yes, we'll come back.
Awesome.
We'll do it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ben. We appreciate
It's
you.
been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and share it with a buddy who needs to learn how to catch smallmouth or somebody you want to take fishing. We'll catch you on the next one.
That's right. See y'all next week.